for Hartford County Public Schools. We're just thrilled to see you all here this evening. Parent Academy is a new initiative from Hartford County Public Schools designed to empower you as parents to support your children in home and the community in their learning and social emotional growth. So we're so excited to have you here tonight and to have Dr. Leonard Sachs kick it off for us. Savannah Bowker from the Department of Community Services is going to come up and introduce Dr. Sachs. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Again, my name is Savannah Bowker. I'm a project manager for Department of Community Services. And on behalf of the Glassman administration, we are excited to host Dr. Leonard Sachs. He will be discussing raising children in a society inundated with technology. The Glassman administration is proud to provide this opportunity for families to learn how to protect their children's mental health and believes this is an important topic in today's digital world. So I would like to present Dr. Leonard Sachs. He is a renowned physician, psychologist, and best-selling author. Dr. Sachs has spoken on issues of child and adolescent development around the world. He has written 4 books: Why Gender Matters, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, and The Collapse of Parenting, which is a New York Times bestseller. Dr. Sachs has also appeared on The Today Show, PBS, NPR, CNN, Fox News, the BBC, and many other national and international media outlets. So let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Sachs.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. I certainly want to thank Savannah Bowker, who has done everything to make it possible for me to meet with you this evening, and I appreciate the opportunity. So a word about my background. I earned my undergraduate degree in biology at MIT. I then earned my doctorate in psychology and my MD at Penn. In 1990, I started a medical practice in Montgomery County, Maryland, and worked there for 18 years. And then sold my practice to my associate and took a 5-year sabbatical to visit schools and communities across the United States and around the world. I'd actually started doing that a few years earlier, but that was kind of my full-time occupation for 5 years. I've now visited more than 400 schools. I returned to clinical practice 6 years ago in Chester County, Pennsylvania. I've written 4 books. My first book, Why Gender Matters. My second book, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, and The Collapse of Parenting. I prepared a handout for you. I'm going to be citing a lot of research this evening, and I'm going to make a lot of recommendations. The point of the handout is basically to save you the trouble of taking notes. All the main points of the talk are in the handout, kind of in the outline format. All the important citations are listed there if you want to look up the scholarly citations, which is always a good idea. The handout is mynameLeonardSachs.com/harford.pdf. It is case sensitive. It is all lowercase. You don't need it now, and I would encourage you not to pull it up now. It's 12 pages, single space. It's not designed for a phone. It's designed for a laptop or larger screen. And I'll show you this link again. But I want to begin this evening with a quiz question. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to indicate what you believe is the correct answer to this question. This question is based on a longitudinal cohort study, meaning that researchers recruited a large number of young children, followed them throughout childhood, through adolescence, and into adulthood. When each kid was 12 years old, they brought each kid in for full-day psychological assessment to determine for each of these kids their openness to new ideas. Working with the school, you get the grade point average. With a full-day psychological assessment, you can calculate a valid measure of emotional stability, and that's what they did for each one of these kids. Likewise, of friendliness and agreeableness and of self-control. They did all that at 12 years of age, and then they followed these individuals for 20 years more. 20 years later, you track down these kids. They're not kids anymore. They're 32 years old. They're adults. And at 32 years of age, you determine their health, their wealth, and their happiness. One of the 5 parameters shown here, measured at 12 years of age, powerfully and accurately predicts health and wealth and happiness 20 years later, but only one. The other 4 of these 5 parameters predicts one or none of the 3 principal outcomes, the 3 principal outcomes being health, wealth, and happiness. I want you to raise your hand if you think that one key parameter is openness to new ideas. Don't look at your neighbor, they don't know. Raise your hand if you think it's grades at school. Raise your hand if you think it is emotional stability. Raise your hand if you think it is friendliness and agreeableness. Raise your hand if you think it is self-control. I'm going to keep you in suspense. If you leave early, you will not get the answer. But if you stick it out for the next 90 minutes, you will get the answer, and hopefully you'll get more than just the answer to this question. My hope this evening is that you'll leave tonight with concrete strategies that you can begin using right now in your home to improve the odds for your child. Let's go back 55 years. In 1964, scholars had found that when immigrants arrive in the United States from overseas, that those immigrants are at risk of being anxious and depressed, at increased risk compared with children born and raised in the United States. And so a consensus arose among scholars that when kids arrive here from overseas and they don't speak English, we should get them speaking English. Not as a kind of cultural imperialism, but they said, in the best interest of the child. Because they did have good evidence that if you get that kid speaking English at home, you improve odds for that kid. You decrease the risk of anxiety and depression. The very first line in your handout is a citation to a monograph edited by Dr. Milton Gordon and published by Oxford University Press, 1964, pulling together this research, showing that when you get immigrant children speaking English and get their parents speaking English, you improve outcomes for those children, by which he meant that you decrease the risk of anxiety and depression among those kids. Now, I rush to the disclaimers. The first disclaimer is that I am not endorsing Dr. Milton Gordon. I'm not suggesting that I would recommend such an approach. Secondly, I'm not suggesting that 1964 were the good old days. They were not. That era was much more racist and sexist than our own era. There are no good old days. Every era has its challenges. But I do mention this because I think we can learn from the past. And it is a matter of empirical fact that 55 years ago, becoming American, if you like, speaking English at home and participating into American culture, improved outcomes for children. That was true 55 years ago. It is not true today. Today, the reverse is true. To understand what scholars mean by the immigrant paradox, I want you to imagine 2 families living in adjacent homes right here. Both families consist of a mother, a father, teenage son, and teenage daughter. The household income is the same in both households. The occupations of the parents are the same in both households. The big difference between these 2 homes is that in one home, mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in the United States, and they speak English at home. In the adjacent household, mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in Bangalore, India, and they've just arrived here. They do not speak English at home, they speak Gujarati in the home. Now, in which home are we more likely to find that the teenage daughter is binge drinking, or cutting herself with razor blades, or has been diagnosed with an eating disorder, or has been diagnosed with anxiety or depression? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the American girl has those problems compared to the girl who just arrived here from India. In which home are we more likely to find that the teenage boy says school is a stupid waste of time, or has been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or has been arrested for street racing? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the American boy has those problems compared to the boy who just arrived here from India. Now, as you know, I'm a medical doctor. When a medical doctor uses the term dose-response effect with regard to a toxin, we mean that the more you are exposed to the toxin, the more likely you are to experience an adverse outcome. That boy and that girl from India, the first week they're here, the first month they're here, they're very unlikely to experience any of these bad outcomes. But if they stay here, and especially if they begin speaking English at home as a marker of assimilation into American culture, their risk begins to rise. And if they stay here and they're speaking English at home, after 3, 4, 5 years, their risk now approaches that of the neighbor kids who have been born and raised in this country. These findings lead researchers to conclude that American popular culture is now toxic to children and teenagers. And they use the word toxic not in a derogatory or pejorative sense, but merely in a descriptive sense, meaning that the more a child is exposed to American culture, the more likely they are to experience an adverse outcome. What happened? Why is becoming American now a major risk factor for anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol use, disengagement from school, and many other bad outcomes? And what can we do about it? That's the first question, and indeed one of the central questions I'm going to try to answer this evening. To get a handle on that question, I think it's helpful to talk to comparative anthropologists, people like Gilbert Hurt and especially David Gilmour at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, as I did in writing my second book, Boys Adrift, and ask them, what do enduring cultures have in common? Is there anything that all enduring cultures share? Well, let's consider the Navajo, the native people of the American Southwest, and let's contrast them with Orthodox Jews. These are two cultures that have been around for thousands of years. They're still with us. We know a great deal about them. Is there anything they share in terms of what they eat or what they drink or how they dress or what their religious beliefs are? Well, on those parameters, the answer would be no. That's why I choose those two examples, because they are so different on the parameters I just mentioned. Particularly, their religious beliefs could not be more different. But there is one thing they share, one thing the scholars tell us that all enduring cultures share, and that is strong bonds across generations. So that's a photograph of Canada. Now, if you know only a little about the Navajo, and someone says, well, what's Canada? What does that word mean? You might say, well, it's a rite of passage. When a Navajo girl has her first menstrual period, she stays in the home of her grandmother for 4 days and 4 nights, and during those 4 days and nights, all of her adult female relatives call on her, and she demonstrates to them that she has indeed mastered the arts and crafts of Canada. And that's true enough as far as it goes, but it's more than a rite of passage. It's a process that's been going on usually 2, 3, 4 years by the time this girl gets her menstrual period. And this is not primarily about mother-daughter. Mom traditionally plays little role. It's the grandmothers and the women of the grandmother's generation who take the lead. And that's a common, though not universal, feature of enduring cultures, that the grandparents have a big role to play. You have a strong community of women for girls and a community of men for boys, and strong bonds across generations. Now, everyone's heard of bar mitzvah, but if you're not connected to someone in the Orthodox community, you may not know that in the Orthodox Synagogue, every aspect of religious life is single-sex. Men and boys worship here, there's a barrier, women and girls worship there. Every Saturday in an Orthodox synagogue, you read a particular portion from the 5 books of Moses. When you conclude that liturgical sequence and you finish the last chapter of Deuteronomy, now you're starting over with Genesis 1:1. That night, all the men and only the men stay up traditionally dusk till dawn. You have older men with younger men with boys. You have a community of men for boys. That's not that boy's father, it's another man in the synagogue. You have a community of women for girls, teaching each girl this is what it means to be a Jewish woman. Now, what that Jewish girl is learning is completely different from what the Navajo girl is learning. There's almost no overlap in the content, but the process is the same. The anthropologists tell us that in every enduring community, we have a community of women for girls, a community of men for boys, and strong bonds across generations. And that used to be true of us as well. When I say us, I mean Americans who speak English at home. And that's not a guess, and it's not nostalgia. We have scholars like Robert Putnam at Harvard, who spent more than 20 years leading an army of graduate students across the United States, conducting over 200,000 structured interviews, documenting that a generation ago, 50 years ago, you could go into any neighborhood just about in the United States, any neighborhood where people spoke English, and you would find a sewing circle, organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity, which is a fancy way of saying that the women and girls in this sewing circle were not related to one another, they just happened to live on the same block. He documents not only formal but also informal associations. So his team has a photograph of a bunch of guys working on the hood of a car in Shaker Heights, Ohio in August 1967. And his students dig up, okay, who were the men and boys in that photograph? What were their names? How old were they at the time the photograph was taken? Well, they figure out there were older men, younger men, and boys in that picture. You drive around the United States today on a Saturday afternoon, you just might see two old geezers working under the hood of their 65 Corvette, but the boys are not with them. The boys are more likely indoors playing video game. The bonds across generations have been broken. Bowling used to be more popular in the United States, but more importantly, from Dr. Putnam's perspective, it was done differently. 50 years ago, most of the bowling was in bowling leagues. And Tuesday night might be the women's night, and Thursday night was the men's night. And again, his graduate students dig up, all right, who was in the bowling league in Lake Forest, Illinois in December of 1968? Well, let's see. On this particular team, there was a 53-year-old woman, a 36-year-old woman, a 27-year-old woman, a 17-year-old girl, and a 12-year-old girl. Girls still go bowling, but they go bowling alone, the title of Dr. Putnam's best-known book. Meaning instead of this 17-year-old girl going bowling with a community of women, she's going bowling with a bunch of 17-year-olds, girls and boys mixed together, which as far as Dr. Putnam is concerned is bowling alone. When Dr. Putnam uses the term community, he means bonds across generations. And the bonds across generations have been broken. So that's one big change. Again, American culture used to be a healthy and nurturing culture for children. It is now toxic for children and teenagers. Why is that? One part of the answer is that the bonds across generations have been broken. But that's only one part of the answer. The anthropologists teach us that enduring cultures have taught kids to respect the grown-ups. And that was true of us as well. Again, when I say us, I mean Americans who speak English at home. And that was true 50 years ago, even if the grown-ups themselves were lousy parents who didn't say a word about it. It didn't matter. If this kid spoke English at home, and he watched television, he was immersed in a culture that did teach it. You look at the most popular television shows from that era, shows like The Dick Van Dyke Show, My Three Sons, The Andy Griffith Show. The parents in these shows are consistently knowledgeable, competent, reliable, thoughtful, productive, caring, and kind. The longest running television comedy on American television right now, The Simpsons. Homer Simpson is a bum, his son's an idiot. His wife varies. Sometimes she's wise and insightful, more often she is not. The only one of the four major leads who's consistently wise and insightful is the daughter, Lisa. But I'm not picking on this show. I don't see this show as a cause. I see this show as a symptom. I actually have great regard for the people who write for this show. In one episode, you get to see inside Homer Simpson's brain. Homer Simpson's brain has three major drives: sleep, donuts, and beer. I think there's great insight there. If you imagine a TV cartoon depicting the brain of an American man a generation ago, it probably would have shown the entire brain as a sex drive. That was the stereotype of American men 50 years ago, that they were only interested in sex. Not anymore. Now it's sleep, donuts, and beer. The testosterone levels of American men have fallen by half over the past 60 years. The sperm counts of American men have fallen by more than half over the last 45 years. So I think the writers are onto something. In writing my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I reviewed the 150 most popular television shows in the United States. And out of 150 shows, I found only one show which often or even occasionally depicts a parent as knowledgeable, competent, reliable. And that one outlier show is Blue Bloods, starring Tom Selleck. But this is a rare exception. This show is not characteristic of American television today. What would be much more characteristic of American television today is a show like Modern Family, where the straight dad is consistently an idiot whose bumbling, ridiculous antics are the butt of the joke. We're supposed to laugh at him. His 3 children are generally wiser and more insightful than their idiot dad. If you don't watch the Disney Channel, you might think, oh, Disney, that's got to be family friendly. Bzz, wrong. Disney Channel is a major vector of what I call the culture of disrespect. This Disney show, Dog with a Blog, the father, supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about what kids want or what kids need. The talking dog is always wiser and more insightful than the dumb dad. This Disney Channel show, Liv and Maddie, the 2 girls are as different as they can be. The one thing they agree on is that their mother, also supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about the behavior or motivation of children or teens. The 2 girls roll their eyes in disbelief at the ridiculous, clueless, out-of-touch suggestions made by their idiot mom. And that is characteristic of American television, as I document in the opening chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting. Girls and boys are not born knowing what it means to be ladies and gentlemen. They have to be taught, and we no longer teach them, so they look to the marketplace, and the marketplace has changed. That's Sam Cooke. A generation ago, Sam Cooke had a #1 hit song. He sang, "Don't Know Much About History." He sang, "Now I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be, because maybe by being an A student baby, I could win your love for me." He goes on to mention French, geometry, and trigonometry as subjects in which he's going to try harder to earn an A rather than a B, because he believes that by earning an A, he will raise his status in the eyes of the pretty girl. And that was characteristic of American culture a generation ago. That was a #1 hit song. 50 years ago, American popular culture, the culture of kids who spoke English at home, was the culture of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel, Petula Clark, Aretha Franklin. Not anymore. Today, American popular culture, the culture of kids who speak English at home, is the culture of Eminem, Nicki Minaj, Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, Akon. Akon chose the name Akon to remind you of his claim. He claims to be a con. He claims to be a convicted felon. He claims to have served 2 years for grand theft auto in the Georgia State Penitentiary, a claim which turns out to be false. When he got to be famous, the reporters looked it up, and they found that, well, he was arrested once on a charge of possession of 1 item of stolen property, but those charges were quickly dismissed. He's never been convicted of anything, and he's never been inside a penitentiary except to perform. American popular culture has changed from a culture in which young men wanted you to think they were scholars, working hard to earn an A rather than a B in geometry, to a culture in which young men would like you to think they're convicted felons or gang members, even if they are not. That's a significant change. Bruno Mars. Reporters covering the Grammys last year called the Grammys the coronation of Bruno Mars. He won 6 Grammys, more than any other artist. including Song of the Year. There he is holding up his Grammy for Song of the Year. Well, what was the best song of the year in the opinion of the Recording Academy? Very popular song, #1 hit song. Well, let's look at the lyrics. I got a condo in Manhattan. Baby girl, what's happening? You and your blank invited. So go on and get to clapping. Turn around and drop it for a player. Drop it for me. There's a screenshot from the YouTube video, which has had over 1 billion views. Billion with a V, B with a B. So he's addressing a woman he appears not to know. He offers her first champagne, then diamonds, then a shopping spree in Paris, and finally he just offers to hand her his wallet if she will just turn around and drop it for a player, because that's what I like. He's offering money for sex. And this is the best song of the year, in the opinion of the Recording Academy. Money makes her smile. Not courtesy or love or respect. Money makes her smile. Let's imagine a young man in the workplace. He approaches a female colleague and he says, hey, baby girl, what's happening? You and your blank invited. How about you turn around and drop it for a player, because that's what I like, and offers her some money. What would happen to that young man? Well, he might be fired. If he's not fired, he's certainly going to be required to do some re-education, shall we say. And in his compulsory re-education, he will be taught that addressing a young woman as you and your blank is objectification. It is never permissible. That offering a female co-worker money for sex is never allowed. But the young man might reasonably defend himself. He might say, well, look, that's exactly what Bruno Mars did in his song, and he got 6 Grammys, and he got 1.4 billion views on his YouTube video. How is a young man supposed to know if he has received no instruction? If he's immersed in a culture that is teaching him that this is what you do. What about the Grammys this year? This year, the big winner was Childish Gambino, also known as Donald Glover. Got 4 Grammys, more than any other. No one got more than 4, including the Grammy for Best Video and Song of the Year for his song, This Is America. Well, that's an interesting title. What is America? Well, we just want the money, first of all. America is first of all about money, according to this song. But then he goes into a room where there are 10 African Americans singing gospel music. He takes a machine gun and shoots them all and holds up his arms in triumph. America is about violence, senseless violence, and about sex. So if you Google the phrase, what are the hidden messages in Childish Gambino's video, This Is America, you'll get over 1,000 videos. This is one of the most popular. And in the video trying to figure out what Childish Gambino is trying to say, they say, okay, you remember that scene where he kills the 10 singers? I'm thinking that's probably a reference to the shooting and killing of 9 African Americans at the church in Charleston, South Carolina, because 10 is 9 plus 1, get it? And maybe it is. I am not attempting a critique of this video. I'm just asking you to consider what your 12-year-old is seeing as they're watching this video. Your 12-year-old doesn't remember Charleston. That was 5 years ago. They're not getting the hidden messages here. What they're seeing is a video that is teaching them. The straightforward surface message of this video is that America is about sex, money, and violence. And it got 4 Grammys, including Best Video and Best Song. And the message is that America is not deserving of respect, that nothing is deserving of respect. So the first chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Culture of Disrespect. And in that chapter, I defend my claim that the popular culture, as experienced by kids in this country who speak English at home, is a culture that teaches them that it's cool and funny to be disrespectful to adults. And not just to adults, but to one another. It is common to find American kids wearing t-shirts that say things like, "Do I look like I care? I'm out of your league. You look better on Facebook. You look like I need another drink. I don't need you, I have Wi-Fi. I'm not shy, I just don't like you." I met with students across Scotland, in Edinburgh, in Perthshire, and in Stirling, and I showed them some of these t-shirts. And the kids in Scotland were baffled. They wondered, why would anyone put on a t-shirt that says to the whole world, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you"? To the kids in Scotland, that didn't seem funny, it seemed rude and childish. But American kids, marinated in the culture of disrespect, find this sort of thing funny. I was actually in Sydney, Australia, and I did see a teenage boy wearing a t-shirt with these words, different design, but the same words. And I walked up to him, turns out he was an American kid on vacation. You do not find these t-shirts outside of North America. So again, 50 years ago, American culture was healthy and nurturing for children. Today it is toxic. Why? What happened? Well, we've addressed two factors so far. One is the breaking of bonds across generations, and the other is the emergence and dominance in this country today of the culture of disrespect. Those two factors affect girls and boys equally, but the next two do not. The next is video games. When researchers study how American kids use video games, they find that girls and boys tend to play different video games, and they tend to play them differently. So Farmville was very big for American girls a few years back. It's not so big now, but some popular video games for American girls right now are Candy Crush and Homescapes. When you ask, okay, who has spent more than 4 hours in the past week playing Candy Crush or Homescape, you find that girls greatly outnumber boys on that parameter. Most popular video games for American boys are Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto, RDR2, Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Halo. Researchers find that the average girl spends about 20 minutes in a session playing Candy Crush or Homescapes. The average boy playing Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto spends 2.5 hours in a session. So I was meeting with high school students, sharing some of the research on playing video games, trying to create a conversation, which I'm pretty good at doing, if I may say so. And the boys, this is something that interests the boys, and they are anxious to contribute. So I was talking about research on Call of Duty. I referred to Call of Duty as a video game, and a boy raised his hand, and I called on him. And very politely, he corrected me. He said, "Call of Duty is not a game," he said. "It is a lifestyle." And the other boys hooted and hollered. I've never heard a girl make a similar comment about Candy Crush, although I did see a girl wearing Candy Crush leggings, so maybe that counts. What is the relation between how much time you spend playing video games and how well you do in school? Well, researchers find that below a threshold of 6 hours a week, there is no relation. A kid who spends 5 hours a week playing video games does no better and no worse on average in school than a kid who doesn't play video games at all. Beyond that threshold of 6 hours a week, there is a linear and negative association, which is a fancy way of saying that the boy who spends 10 hours a week playing video games does less well than the kid who spends 5 hours a week playing video games. The kid who spends 20 hours a week playing video games does much less well. And I asked Craig Anderson, why is that? And he answered with one word. He said, displacement. Displacement. What does he mean by displacement? What he means is that if you're spending 20 hours a week playing video games, that's 20 hours a week you're not doing something else, like studying or sleeping. The average American boy now spends 13 hours a week playing video games. I'm not talking about surfing the web. I'm talking about playing a dedicated video game like Fortnite, Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, RDR2, compared to 4 hours a week for the average female. In your handout, you will find these guidelines based on the research. No more than 40 minutes a night on school nights playing video games, no more than an hour a day on weekends, and your minutes do not roll over. So if a boy goes 3 weeks without playing video games, that does not mean that he's allowed to spend 7 hours on a Saturday playing a Fortnite binge. That is binge gaming, and it is harmful. No screen time until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. And that means no devices in the bedroom. Anderson and Gentili did a remarkable study in which they recruited more than 3,000 kids at 12 years of age and then followed them for 3 years. At enrollment, they did a full-day psychological assessment to determine for each one of these kids to what extent is this kid altruistic or selfish, honest or dishonest, patient or impatient, gentle or hostile. So the way to conceptualize this story is to imagine you've got two identical boys. By identical, I mean that they have the same race, ethnicity, household income, family composition, language spoken at home. And these two boys get exactly the same scores on all psychological parameters. And both these boys spend 20 hours a week playing video games. The difference between these two boys is that one boy, his parents do not allow him to play violent games. So he's playing sports games like Madden NFL football, NBA basketball. The boy next door, his parents don't know what games he's playing. He goes in his door, closes the door. He's got a video game console in his bedroom. And he's playing the games that are most popular with American boys, all of which are violent games. Scholars define a violent game as a game in which you must kill in order to win. At enrollment, as I said, these two boys are identical on every parameter. But after 3 years, not after a week or after a month, after 3 years, the boy playing the violent game has changed. He has become more hostile, more selfish, less honest, less patient compared to the boy next door who's also been spending 20 hours a week but who's playing only sports games, not violent games. And after 3 years, the magnitude of the difference between these two boys is pretty large. After 3 years, the difference between these two boys is comparable to the difference between a boy raised in a loving and nurturing home all his life and a boy raised in a violent and abusive home all his life. And yet the boy playing the violent games has no insight, no awareness of how much he has, in fact, changed. So let me tell you one of the clever things that these researchers do. At the first assessment session, when each kid is 12 years old, at the end of the full-day psychological assessment, the technician says, all right, we're all done, thank you very much. Exit this door, make a right turn, go out to the waiting area, you'll find your parents, goodbye. Boy goes out in the hallway, there's a $20 bill on the ground. At age 12, most of the kids pick up the $20 bill, walk it back into the room and say, hey, somebody must have just dropped a $20 bill in the hallway. Would you please turn it in to Lost and Found? I'm sure they'll be looking for it. 3 years later, you bring each kid back. They're now 15 years old. Once again, you do the comprehensive psychological assessment. Once again, the technician says, all right, we're all done. Goodbye. Exit that door, make a right turn, go down the hallway to the waiting area. Your parents are waiting. Once again, there's a $20 bill in the hallway. The boy who's been playing the sports games picks up the $20 bill, walks it back into the room and says, hey, somebody must have just dropped a $20 bill in the hallway. Would you please, it's the funniest thing, exact same thing happened here 3 years ago. It's like somebody here's just sprinkling $20 bills around. The boy who's been playing the violent games goes out in the hallway, sees a $20 bill, looks both ways, there's nobody there, bends over, picks it up, stuffs it in his pocket, leaves the building. But when you say to that boy, have you changed at all as a result of playing these games? Have you become any more likely to take something that does not belong to you? He says, no, I haven't changed. I certainly haven't changed as a result of playing these games. I know it's just a game. I'm not going to go out and shoot anybody. I have not changed one bit. He is absolutely certain that he has not changed. He has no awareness of how much he has, in fact, changed. And Anderson and Gentili wonder, why is that? Why does the boy have no awareness? And they answer their own question. The answer they give is that we lead our moral lives relative to our nearest neighbor. We judge ourselves relative to our nearest neighbor. Turns out that boys who are spending 20 hours a week playing violent video games are hanging out with other boys who spend 20 hours a week playing violent video games. And they're all changing, but they are not changing relative to one another. So this boy is absolutely certain that he has not changed. Some violent games are worse than others. And by worse, I mean they push this change from honest to dishonest, from patient to impatient, from altruistic to selfish, farther and faster than other games. The worst games are games which employ what Anderson and Gentili call a moral inversion. A moral inversion means that in the context of the game, good is bad and bad is good. So for example, in Grand Theft Auto, if you want to achieve your mission, you must acquire money and weapons. And you can get the best weapons by killing police officers. So in the context of the game, it would be a good and clever thing to sneak up on some police officers and kill them before they know what you're up to. That way you can get their weapons. That's the only way you can get their weapons. You have to kill them. Now in the real world, to sneak up on police officers and kill them just because they are police officers would be wrong and evil. But in the context of the game, it is a good and clever thing to do. If you want to play Grand Theft Auto, you must play as a man. There are no female avatars prepared in the game. There are women in the game. Many of them are prostitutes. If you get wounded in your firefight with the police officers, you can restore your health to 100% by having sex with a prostitute. But that will cost you money. You go up to her, you ask her how much, she tells you, you give her that money, and then you can have sex with her, meaning you watch your avatar flopping on top of her. But you need money in order to complete your mission. You don't have to do this, but it makes very good sense in the context of the game then to take out your pistol and shoot her in the head. And as blood gushes out of her head and she collapses and dies very realistically, you get your money back. That's the only way you can get your money back. You have to kill her. Now, in the real world, to kill a prostitute so as to get your money back would be insane and evil. But in the context of this game, it is a good and clever thing to do. And this is the second most popular video game in the United States. Before Fortnite, it was the most popular video game in the United States. And a few years ago, when it was the most popular video game, the most popular game, lawmakers in California flew Anderson and Gentili to Sacramento and took sworn testimony. They said, "Are you kidding me? The most popular game in the country has been shown to change personality, to cause kids to be more selfish, less patient, less honest." And they wrote a statute. The California statute made it a civil offense to sell not just any game, but the worst games, like Grand Theft Auto, to a minor child. Basically, it put these games in the same category as cigarettes, put them behind the counter. You'd have to show ID to show that you're at least 18 years of age in order to buy these games. And the California statute was signed into law by then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is ironic. But the video game industry immediately brought suit, claiming that the California statute violated their First Amendment right of free speech. And the video game lawsuit went to the United States Supreme Court. And in a decision written by the late Justice Antonin Scalia, the United States Supreme Court agreed with the video game industry and threw out the California statute, rendering it null and void. Justice Samuel Alito wrote a concurrence. Justice Alito said, "Look, I have read the research of Anderson and Gentili, and I share the concerns of California parents and California lawmakers." He said, "These games are heinous." He said, there is no question based on the research that no child should be playing these violent, destructive games. He continued, nevertheless, it is the ruling of this court that deciding what games children will play is not the job of the California State Assembly, it's the job of the parent. And I have included a link to the full text of Justice Scalias' opinion and Justice Alito's concurrence in your handout. And I hope you will read it, because you need to understand this is your job. There can be no law or regulation restricting the sale of any game, however awful, to any child, however young, because the United States Supreme Court has so ruled. This is your job. You must know what games your son is playing. You must limit, govern, and guide what games your son is playing. When your son is going over to a friend's house, it is your job to call the friend's parents and ask, will there be a grown-up around to make sure my son is not playing a game like Grand Theft Auto? And if the parent says, look, they go in the bedroom, close the door, I'm not going to waste my time chaperoning what games the boys are playing, then it's your job to say to your son, I am sorry, you are not allowed to go to that home. There's a lot at stake here. This is your job. Video games is more of a boy's issue than a girl's issue. When scholars ask, among American teenagers, who's spending at least 20 hours a week playing violent video games? On that parameter, they find that boys outnumber girls by more than 8-1. So video games are more of an issue for boys. Our next factor is more of an issue for girls, and that is social media. It's worth one slide to recall how fast this has happened. 16 years ago, Facebook did not exist. According to Nielsen, more than half of American girls at age 12 are now on Instagram. Instagram did not exist 10 years ago, and now it's a major part of the lived experience for many American girls. To understand why that matters, and why that matters for girls more than for boys, I want you to imagine a girl living in ancient times. And by ancient times, I mean 1999, 20 years ago. So let's imagine a girl 20 years ago. It's the evening. She's writing in her diary, by which I mean she's writing with a pen in a bound volume of blank pages. She's writing about who she likes, who she doesn't like, the kind of girl she most admires, the kind of woman she hopes to become, what she really wants out of life. She's doing some important work. The great American psychologist, Dr. Abraham Maslow, believed that many adults were miserable because they didn't know what they really wanted. Figuring out what you really want, Dr. Maslow concluded, is not trivial. It takes effort, it takes time. He believed that many adults are miserable because they're working hard at jobs they don't like in pursuit of goals that are not meaningful to them. So this girl, writing 5 pages about what she really wants, she's doing some important work. Fast forward to today. When I meet with middle school kids, high school kids at a school, I'll often ask them, all right, when I meet with kids, it's not a PowerPoint, it's a conversation. So I'll say, who's on Instagram? Most of the hands go up. Who's on Facebook? A few hands go up. Who's on Twitter? A few hands go up. Who's on Snapchat? All the hands go up. Almost all. Then I'll say, who here has a diary? In an auditorium of 300 kids, 4 hands go up. Then I'll say, all right, who's posted on any social media in the last 7 days? Almost all the hands go up. Who's posted on any social media in the last 24 hours? More than half the hands go up. Who's written in their diary in the last 7 days? 2 hands go up. Last 24 hours? No hands. The social media have crowded out the diary. Kids are busy, and there's not enough time in the day to do both. I just did this conversation with kids at a synagogue in Nashville, Tennessee, this past Sunday. And then I asked them, what's the difference? The four of you who raised your hands and said that you have a diary, would any one of the four of you care to share with your colleagues here? What's the difference between writing a diary and posting on Instagram? And Lily Faye in the front row raised her hand, and I called on her, and she said, the diary is private, Instagram is public. Bingo. That's right. Diary is private, Instagram is public. When researchers look to see how American kids are using Instagram or other social media, they do not find any 5-page essays about what I really want out of life. That's not the way kids use social media. What they find are lots and lots of photos. And this is true for boys and this is true for girls. But it turns out that boys and girls use social media differently. So a boy and a girl both go to a football game, and they don't both take pictures of the game, but it turns out the boy is taking a picture of the game, or of the pretty cheerleader at the game. The girl's turning the phone on herself, and she's taking 100 selfies at the game. And then that night, she's going through those 100 selfies and finding 2 or 3 where she's laughing and the kids around her laughing, and that's what she posts on her Instagram. Here I am at the game, we had a great time. The difference between writing in the diary and posting on social media is the difference between living and performing. Diary is about living. It's about figuring out who you are and what you want out of life. Social media, as used by American teenagers, is a performance. What's a performance? Well, a performance is a show that you put on to entertain or amuse other people. I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with that, as long as you realize that the performance has to come to an end and you take off your mask and resume your real life. My concern listening to American girls is that many of them are trapped in what I have come to call the cyber bubble of 24/7 texting and social media, and the mask never comes off. The performance never ends, and it is exhausting and it is draining. These girls are hyper-connected to other girls, but becoming disconnected from themselves. We now have very good research from longitudinal cohort studies showing that the more time a teenager spends on social media, the more likely that teen is to become depressed. So here's one of those longitudinal cohort studies. The more time teens spend on, Instagram, looking at other kids' Instagram, or looking to see how many likes they got on their own Instagram, the more likely they are to become depressed. And this is true for boys, but it's a much bigger effect for girls than it is for boys. So I met with Kathy Charles at her office at Napier University. Different cohort, different group of kids, same result. The more time a girl spends on social media like Instagram, the more likely she is to become depressed. That was a large effect in Kathy Charles' data, but in her data set, it was almost non-existent for boys. And she didn't know why. When I met with her, she could not explain the girl-boy difference in her own data. So she was very interested when I shared with her work by Carol Dweck and her colleagues at Stanford, showing that girls are very ready to believe that other girls are having more fun than they are, that other girls' lives are more interesting than their own life is. This turns out to be not at all true for boys. Turns out that boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is to other people. And girls and boys use social media differently than boys do. So Vanessa gets a puppy, and it's a really cute puppy, and she takes 200 pictures of her cute puppy, and she posts a dozen of the cutest pictures on her Instagram. Here's my puppy, isn't it cute? But I have some very sad news. Vanessa's puppy got loose ran out into the street, got run over by a truck. The dog is dead. She did not post a photo of the mangled corpse on her Instagram. Boys do. It would not be unusual for a boy to post a photo of his dead dog on his Instagram. A boy and a girl both get sick. They both throw up. The boy posts a photo of his own vomit on his Instagram. Girls never do that. Now, imagine a girl, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age, sitting in her bedroom, looking at all the other girls' pages. There's Emily at the football game. She's having a great time. There's Madison at the party. She's having a blast. There's Vanessa with her new puppy. Isn't it cute? I'm just sitting there not doing anything. My life sucks. The more time you spend on Instagram, the more likely you are to become depressed. That is a much larger effect for girls than it is for boys, and you now know 3 factors that drive that male-female difference in the data. One is that girls are more invested in their posts. Girls post 5 times as many photos as boys do on average. And if you don't like Jacob's photo of the pretty cheerleader, he doesn't care. But if you don't like Emily's photo of Emily, she's going to take it more personally. Boys post a wider range of their lived experience. The dead dog, the vomit. This boy looking at Jacob's dead dog or Brett's vomit is less likely to want to be Jacob or Brett. But girls are posting mostly the fun stuff, the happy stuff. And boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is to begin with. So 3 mechanisms drive that sex difference. Now, if a grown-up were sitting with that girl, the grown-up could explain, look, everybody's life is a mix of happy and sad, of success and disappointment. And for most people who've ever lived, there's been more disappointment than success, more sadness than happiness. Those other girls' lives are not fundamentally different from yours. They also have a mix of happy and sad. They're only posting the happy stuff. So what can you do about it? The first step is to recognize that most 14-year-olds are not masters of time management. So in another study, they asked this girl, how much time were you on Instagram last night? She said, 40 minutes. It was actually more than 2 hours. But I don't think she was lying. I think she lost track of time. This is where you must step in. I'm not advising a prohibition on social media. The evidence does not support that. I recognize that for many American girls, Instagram is a major mechanism by which they stay in touch with each other. But 3 hours a night is too much. Kids are busy. 20 minutes is sufficient for your daughter to log on, respond to her messages, and log off. I encourage you to install a parental monitoring app, and I discuss these in greater detail in your handout. I don't endorse any one over the others. All of them make it very easy for you to monitor and to limit what your daughter is doing online. Almost all of them will give you a dashboard on your own phone so you can see what your daughter is doing. And then you set the criteria. You see, okay, she's spending 2 hours a night on social media. That's too much. I will allow her 20 minutes on social media. And she'll get a warning. Most of these apps will give her a warning. You have 5 minutes left. So she knows she needs to quickly answer. And once those minutes are up, she's locked out for 24 hours. Now, I find that some parents are skeptical. They're like, oh, come on, my daughter's just going to Google the phrase, how do I get around parental controls on Nanny? Well, I've done a great many events across Silicon Valley. I'm actually flying back to California tomorrow to speak at the East Bay. And I've talked to some of the people who work for Nanny, and they have told me that Nanny has employees whose full-time job is to Google the phrase, how do I get around parental controls on Nanny, and every variation thereof. And if they find that some kid has found a hole, if a kid has found a hole in the program, they patch it within hours, and your app will update. Many of these apps offer a spy mode, meaning that you can watch what your kid is doing without your kid knowing. Don't ever do that. That's a huge mistake. explain to your kids, look, when I was growing up, my parents insisted on knowing where I was at all times. I have to know where you are at all times. So now it's not out there, it's online. I will know every website you visit and what you do there because that is my job as your parent. Many girls are going to bed with their smartphone switched on. And at 2 a.m., your daughter's getting a text. OMG, Jason and Emily just broke up. This is really big news. We all have to talk about this. Parents are amazed to find that half the 9th grade class is awake and texting at 2 in the morning. Look, the rules of good parenting have not changed in 20 years. But 20 years ago, a teenage girl could not accept a phone call at 2 in the morning because the phone would ring. And the parents would not allow it because they knew it's more important to get a good night's sleep than to be up for an hour in the middle of the night exchanging gossip. That was true 20 years ago, and it's just as true today. All that has changed is the technology. It's now very easy for your daughter to accept that text because the phone never rang, it buzzed, she has it on vibrate mode, and she's not talking, she's texting. But just because it's easy doesn't mean it should happen. This is your job. At 9 o'clock at night, the very latest, you switch off your kid's device and you put it in the charger, which stays in the parent's bedroom. She can have it back tomorrow morning. Now, when you get home this evening and you inform your daughter that you attended a presentation by Dr. Leonard Sachs, and Dr. Sachs recommends that you take her phone no later than 9 o'clock at night, switch it off and put it in the charger, which stays in the parent's bedroom, she may not be pleased. She may protest. She may say, but I use it as my alarm clock. Remind her they still make actual alarm clocks. You can go to the store and buy one. She can pick it out herself. They're not expensive. And now she may get really upset. She may say, but what if there's an emergency? Remind her you still have a landline, a house phone, in your bedroom, the parent's bedroom. If there's a true emergency, her friend is welcome to call the house phone, and you, the parent, will pick up, and you, the parent, will decide if this emergency warrants waking her up at 2 in the morning. It probably doesn't. It can probably wait. Look, this has to be your job. It is not fair to your daughter to put this burden in her lap. What's your 14-year-old daughter supposed to say tomorrow in school when her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight, how come you didn't answer? Is your daughter supposed to say, well, researchers have found that sleep deprivation in adolescence is a major risk factor in the etiology of depression? Come on, that's ridiculous. You have to allow her to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every 9 to 9 and won't have it back till the next morning. This is your job. No devices in the bedroom. No video game consoles in the bedroom. No smartphones in the bedroom. That's not just my opinion. Those are the official guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics. You'll find a link to the full text of the AAP guidelines in your handout, which say no unsupervised use of the internet. There should be no expectation of privacy when a child under 18 is online. The device should be in a public space like the kitchen or the living room. Scholars define sexting as sending or receiving an obscene photo. They define obscene as the nipple of the female breast is exposed or male or female genitalia is exposed. Sexting is rare, but what has become very common is what some scholars call not quite sexting. What they mean by not quite sexting is a girl taking a provocative photo of herself in lingerie or in a bikini and then posting that on Instagram or Snapchat. That has become very common. New York Magazine devoted an entire issue to this. That's not quite sexting. That is not an obscene photo. The nipple is not exposed. The genitalia are not exposed. Why is this harmful? I was doing a version of this presentation for another group of parents, and during Q&A, a father said, Dr. Sachs, I don't understand why you're making such a fuss about what you call not quite sexting. You explained that it is not pornography. She's not going to get arrested. It's not obscene. Why are you being so puritanical? That's the word he used. I explained, look, this girl is presenting herself as an object for the arousal and amusement of boys. Scholars call that self-objectification. And we have a great deal of research showing that girls who engage in this kind of activity are more likely to agree with statements like how you look is way more important than what kind of person you are. They're much more likely to become anxious, less likely to be academically engaged. So in my own practice, a girl I know well was asked by another girl who I don't know. The other girl said, hey, how about I take some pictures of you taking your clothes off and you take some pictures of me taking my clothes off and we'll send them to our boyfriends. And the girl I know said, I can't do that because my mom has installed my mobile watchdog on my phone. As soon as I take a picture, before I even do anything with it, the picture goes to my mom's phone and to her laptop. Here, try it out. And she handed the phone to her friend, and her friend took a picture and called mom at work and said, hey, Miss Kirkpatrick, we just took a picture. Can you see it? And mom's like, yeah, flowers in a vase. Gardenias? Okay, thanks, bye. And the girl who had proposed the striptease said, wow, that's amazing. She said, I wish my parents cared that much about me. They have no idea what I do with my phone. And the striptease did not happen. During Q&A at another one of these presentations, a parent said, I don't understand why the striptease did not happen. He said they could have just used the other girl's phone. So in your handout, you will find 2 studies of actual sexting in which researchers interviewed American teens who were taking obscene photos of themselves and sending them to their friends. And they asked every girl and every boy, why are you doing this? And the most common answer the boy gives is he's doing it because he really enjoys doing it. It's not unusual to find an American teenage boy who really enjoys, at 16 years of age, 16-year-old boy who really enjoys taking a photograph of his own erect penis and sending that photograph to a 15-year-old girl. And furthermore, he's quite certain that the 15-year-old girl will be excited and aroused to receive his photo. He doesn't know that the 15-year-old girl is very likely to be disgusted and repulsed to have this photo. He doesn't know. He's a 16-year-old boy. He's got a long way to go. But then researchers asked the 15-year-old girl, why are you doing this? And the most common answer the girl gives is, well, I wish I didn't have to. And the researchers say, what do you mean you wish you didn't have to? You don't have to. No one's holding a gun to your head, making you do this. And the girl says, yeah, but at the school I go to, it's kind of like part of your job description. It's all the cool girls do it. You're expected. Why did the striptease not happen? I think it didn't happen because neither girl really wanted to do it. But American girls find themselves immersed in a toxic culture that pushes themselves to present themselves sexually. You need to give your daughter an excuse to say, no, I can't do this because my parents have installed this app. If they see anything inappropriate, I lose the phone. Next story refers to a leading school. I will not name it, but I give you a hint. It's not far away. Very fine school, and it deserves to be known as a very fine school. A 12-year-old girl had a 14-year-old boyfriend at the school. He asked her to send him some photos. Nothing raunchy. He just wanted to see her take off her blouse and skirt to reveal bra and panties. So she did as he asked. She went into her bedroom, closed the door, locked the door, and took the photos he had requested and sent them to him using Snapchat. Snapchat claims that you can send a photo using Snapchat with, say, a 5-second self-destruct, and after the recipient has seen the photos for 5 seconds, the photo will vanish and if the recipient tries to save the photo using a screenshot, you, the sender, will be notified. She believes Snapchat. Snapchat is lying. Snapchat knows that there are dozens of free apps out there that allow you to save any photo or video sent via Snapchat without the sender being notified. School administrators later determined he did not mean to share any of the photos. He saved, of course, he used this app to save all the photos that she sent him. School administrators later determined he didn't intend for anyone else to see them. But he was at a party, and he set his phone down to grab some chips and talk to a friend. He had his back to his phone. When I meet with middle school kids, high school kids, I tell them, if you have one of these, it never leaves your person. If you're a boy, it's always in your pocket. If you're a girl and you don't have a pocket, it's always in your purse held against your body. You never separate yourself from your phone. You never turn your back on your phone. I call that basic digital hygiene. Well, no one had ever explained this to this boy. He set his phone down and turned his back on his phone. Another boy wandered over, leaned over the table, picked up the phone. The lock screen had not yet engaged. The boy scrolled over to the gallery, found this girl's photos, forwarded each one of the photos to his own phone, exited the gallery, went back to the home page, put down the phone exactly where he'd found it. First boy didn't know anything had happened. Second boy then posted all this girl's photos on his own Instagram. Within 3 days, everyone had seen them. Boys this girl didn't even know were coming up to her and saying, "Hey, Emily, how about you put on a striptease for us?" She had been invited to go on a 3-day all-girls ski trip. The birthday girl, whose parents were hosting the trip, paying for the bus to take the girls to the mountain, paying for lodging at the resort, paying for the lift tickets. The birthday girl called up this girl and said, "I hate to make this call, but my mom is totally freaking out because all the other moms now think you're some kind of bad influence. And they won't let their daughters go if you're there. So I have to uninvite you. I'm really sorry. I have to uninvite you." This girl had no psychiatric history. She collapsed, hysterical sobbing, refused to go to school, started cutting herself with razor blades. Parents took her to the doctor. Doctor prescribed Lexapro 10 milligram and recommended psychotherapy. That accomplished nothing. So now you have a 12-year-old girl with no psychiatric history, with depression, not responsive to medication or counseling. Who's to blame? The girl, the boyfriend, the other boy? No, they're kids. The parents are to blame. Look, this is a very grown-up device. With this device, I can take a photo and send a photo, and once I send it, I have no control over who sees it or what happens to it. That's a very grown-up functionality. If you're going to put such a device in the hands of a minor child, then you, the parent, are responsible for every photo they take and every photo they receive. So I wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal sharing this story, and I'm very specific in my guidelines. Based on the research, at what age is it appropriate for a child to have a smartphone, meaning a phone that can take a photo and send a photo? Certainly no child under 13 should possess such a phone. And most 13-year-olds are not ready for it. And if you're going to give your teenager a smartphone, you must install on that phone parental monitoring software and explain to your kid, I will see every photo you take, and if I see anything inappropriate, you'll lose the device indefinitely. Or don't give your kid a smartphone. And parents will say, that's ridiculous. Look, my daughter's doing soccer, computer coding. What if her ride doesn't show up? There are no payphones out there anymore. I don't want her going up to a stranger asking to borrow their phone. All right, I get that. I'm the father of a daughter. teenage daughter. That's not an argument for a smartphone. That's an argument for a dumb phone, meaning a phone that can make a phone call and receive a phone call, and that's all it can do. There are many such phones available. You don't know about them because they're not marketed to you. They're marketed to the elderly. My father-in-law is 83. He lives with us. This is his phone. He tells me the battery lasts forever. He charges it about every other month. It doesn't need 3G. It doesn't need 4G. It works everywhere. That takes care of the concern about safety. Your daughter gets stranded. She can call you with one of these, and you can come rescue her or make whatever arrangement need to be made. But if you're going to give your kid a smartphone, you must install on the phone parental monitoring software. And again, American parents push back. As one mother said, she said, look, I don't want to violate my daughter's privacy. If she didn't want me to see her photos, I am fine with that. I don't want to see her photos if she doesn't want me to see them. I respect her privacy. And I told that mom, look, the most important thing you must teach your daughter is that there is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share with a smartphone. Privacy is great. You want to share a photo privately? Here's what you do. You print it out on a piece of photo paper. You go over to your friend's house and you show it to them, and then you shred it. That's privacy. There is no privacy to any photo that you share electronically. I have found the story of General David Petraeus useful in making this point. In case you don't recall, David Petraeus graduated top of his class at West Point, first in his class at Fort Leavenworth, earned a doctorate at Princeton, brigadier general, age 46. George W. Bush appointed him commanding general. Barack Obama named him director of the CIA. You would think he would know that there is no such thing as privacy to any photo that you share with your phone, but somehow he and his mistress didn't get that memo. They seem to have believed we're so smart, we've got our secure websites and our passwords, no one will ever find out. Bzzz, wrong, career over. More recently, a variation on the same story, the world's wealthiest man, David Petraeus, his account was hacked. Jeff Bezos, his account was not hacked. Instead, his girlfriend shared the photos with her brother, who appears to have sold them to the highest bidder. Neither of these men got the memo, got the moral of the story. What's the story? What's the moral of the story of Jeff Bezos and David Petraeus? Actually, I can think of more than one moral. One moral would be, don't cheat on your spouse. These were both married men. Another moral is, don't share anything with a phone or electronically unless you're prepared to see it in the newspaper tomorrow. And you don't teach that by preaching. You teach that by inculcating good habits, by saying, look, I will see every photo you take as soon as you take it. If you don't want me to see it, don't take it. Look, I've lived in the United States all my life. 20 years ago, there used to be a public service announcement that would come on American television. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kids are? Because 20 years ago, the dangers, the drugs, the gangs, the violence were all out there. It was 10 o'clock and your daughter's home alone, then you're doing your job. And we were raised in that era. And so it's 10 o'clock, my daughter's alone in her bedroom, so am I doing a good job? No, that's not enough. If she has one of these, she could be producing and uploading pornography. Your son could be downloading pornography. She could be engaged in cyberbullying. Your son could be a victim of cyberbullying. The challenges have changed because the technology has changed. And many parents want to be their kid's best friend, but a friend is a peer. A friend cannot command. A friend cannot say, I will not allow you to pig out on ice cream right before supper. Only a parent can do that. A friend cannot say, I'm taking your device from you so you can get some sleep. A friend cannot say that. Only a parent can say that. There's any number of kids out there who can be your kid's best friend, but only you can be the parent. If you're going to give your kid a smartphone, you must install some kind of parental monitoring software on the phone and explain to your kid that you will be watching because it's your job. And some parents go a step further. One mom sent her daughter an anonymous text. "Hey, cutie, can you send me some pictures?" Her daughter responded, "No, I know this is you, Mom. Please stop." "Proud of you, honey. Keep making good choices. Love, Mom." So what really matters? What should our highest priority be as parents? You know, until recently, the answer to that question might have been a guess or matter of opinion, but not anymore. Now we have good research that informs the answer to that question. I'm talking now about longitudinal cohort studies in which researchers follow kids from childhood through adolescence right into adulthood. These studies allow us to answer the question, what characteristic of a child that I can influence best predicts good outcomes? Having a good job, not being involuntarily unemployed, being in good health, not being addicted to drugs or alcohol, not being convicted of a felony. Turns out that whether you get an A or a B accounts for very little of the variance. Virtue and character is what counts. Conscientiousness, self-control is measured at 12 years of age. How do you measure self-control at age 12? You don't do a marshmallow test. You don't talk to the kid at all. Those are not validated measures of self-control. You talk to the classmates and to the teachers, and you say, can this kid wait for their turn? Can he or she listen to grown-ups and to peers? Low self-control measured at 12 years of age predicts a high risk of poor physical health 20 years later, and a high risk of drug and alcohol use 20 years later. High self-control at 12 years of age predicts a low risk of poor physical health 20 years later, and a low risk of drug and alcohol use 20 years later. These graphs are in your handout. Low self-control at age 12 predicts a high risk of financial struggles 20 years later. High self-control at age 12 predicts a low risk of financial struggles 20 years later. Low self-control at age 12 predicts a low credit rating 20 years later. High self-control at age 12 predicts a high credit rating 20 years later. What really matters? What should our top priority be as parents? It should be virtue and character, teaching virtue and character. It's not a sermon. It's a robust empirical finding. I devote 2 chapters of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, to reviewing every relevant longitudinal cohort study, and every one of them comes to the same conclusion. Virtue and character predict good outcomes. And the funny thing is that American parents used to teach that before we even had these studies. 20 years ago, it was common to find American parents who said, hey, I'd rather you get a C on the test honestly than cheat and get an A. And yet, over the last 20 years, that has changed. And it's now common to find parents who say, hey, you want to get into University of Maryland College Park, you want to get into Stanford, you got to have amazing grades, because you're not just competing against American kids anymore, you're competing against kids from Asia and Europe, you got to have amazing grades. And there has been an explosion in cheating over the last 20 years, which I document. What parameter measured when a child is 12 years old powerfully and accurately predicts health and wealth and happiness 20 years later? It is self-control and other measures of conscientiousness, like honesty. Psychologists have known for many years that every human personality can be mapped on a 5-dimensional space. The 5 dimensions of human personality are conscientiousness and its subtraits of self-control and honesty, openness to new ideas, friendliness and agreeableness, emotional stability, and extroversion-introversion. Some traits are difficult to change, and personality does become more fixed as we age, but even young adults can change on some traits, and it turns out that self-control and honesty are very amenable to change. They are not hardwired, they are not innate, they have to be taught. You must teach them. How do you teach self-control to your 12-year-old? You say, no dessert until you eat your vegetables. No games until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. And if that has not been the rule in your house, I encourage you to make it the rule in your house. And if that has not been the rule in your house and you make that announcement, there will be an explosion. And the older the child, the bigger the explosion. But if both parents stand their ground, after 6 weeks, not after 1 week, but after 6 weeks, you will have a child with better self-control. And in most cases, a happier child as well. So that's your job. Your job is to teach virtue. But teaching virtue requires that you teach from a position of authority. If you're talking to your child about not cheating on a test, and you say, you know, I personally wouldn't cheat because that's just not my thing, you know, but you do you, you know, whatever floats your boat. You're not teaching anything. I have been a medical doctor for 33 years. I have witnessed firsthand the collapse of American parenting. As recently as 20 years ago, American parents were comfortable saying, do unto others. That's not a suggestion, it's a command. But over the last 20 years, I've seen that command soften, morph into a question, and the question is often something like, well, you know, how would you feel if someone did that to you? And the parent has no idea how to answer when the son says, if someone did that to me, I'd kick him in the nuts and then I'd sit on his face. Jennifer Finney Boylan, a regular columnist for New York Times, had a column on enlightened parenting. She wrote that enlightened parenting means, and I'm quoting now, setting your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it. End quote. That may seem enlightened, but it is not. It is a dereliction of duty. If you set your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, and they live in the United States, what they will discover is Bruno Mars, Miley Cyrus, Kim Kardashian, mainstream pornography. What is childhood for? I mean, quite literally, what is the point? A 4-year-old horse is a mature adult. A 4-year-old child has barely begun. And a horse is a bigger animal than a child. Humans are children or adolescents for more years than most mammals live. Why? What's the point? We don't have to guess. We have scholars who've spent their careers studying this question. And what the scholars tell us is that human childhood is as many years as it is because it takes that long for parents and the other grown-ups to teach the child right and wrong. That's a defining characteristic of our species. The recommendation that you might have read in the New York Times that you should set your child loose to discover their own right and wrong is an abdication of parental responsibility. So researchers at UCLA studied the most popular TV shows on American television from 1967 through 2007 and ranked the most popular shows on 16 parameters in terms of what the show is teaching about what's important, what matters. And they found great consistency in the messages being sent from 1967 through 1997. The most important thing these shows taught, they taught that the most important thing is to do the right thing, to tell the truth, to be a good friend. Whether it was the Andy Griffith Show in 1967, Happy Days 1977, Family Ties 1987, or Sabrina the Teenage Witch 1997, those shows are very different, but the messages are very much the same. Link to the full text of the UCLA report is in your handout. Doing the right thing. Being wealthy, being famous, that was number 15 and number 16 out of 16 from 1967 through 1997. But then in 10 years, from 1997 to 2007, American culture flipped upside down. And suddenly being famous went from being the least important thing to being the most important thing. In shows like Survivor, American Idol, iCarly, it's all about winning and being famous. Doing the right thing, that's going to get you voted off the island. Now it's all about wealth and fame. And other studies suggest it's only gotten worse since 2007. These UCLA researchers titled their article, "The New Cult of Fame," because that's what they believe American popular culture now is. It is a cult of fame that worships being famous and wealthy and devalues doing the right thing. The new cult of fame did not originate with Bruno Mars or Kim Kardashian, but they embody it, they celebrate it, and they promote it. Your great challenge is that you live in the United States. I took this photograph in Times Square. Pepsi's slogan, "Live for now. Don't worry about the sugar, live for now. If it feels good, do it. Live for now. Whatever floats your boat." Real hazard of contemporary American culture. The culture of if it feels good, do it, and you do you, whatever floats your boat, is that it deliberately undermines self-control, overvalues fame and wealth, and disrespects parental authority. So what are you supposed to do about it? I began this evening by talking about how the bonds across generations have been broken. You must restore them. The first thing you must do is to eat supper with your kids. At least one parent. No devices allowed at the dinner table, no screens at the dinner table. The benefits are huge and do not taper. Frank Algar and his colleagues interviewed more than 10,000 adolescents coast to coast and asked them in the last week, how many evening meals have you had at home with at least one parent? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And then for each of these 10,000 plus adolescents quantified internalizing problems like anxiety and depression, externalizing problems like hitting the wall in anger, positive well-being, pro-social behavior, and life satisfaction, and found a huge effect, not just comparing 0 to 7, but at almost every step along the way. Let's compare 5 evening meals at home with a parent to 6 evening meals at home with a parent. Going from 5 to 6, we see a significant decrease in internalizing problems, a significant decrease in externalizing problems, a significant increase in positive well-being and life satisfaction. But what has happened? In 1992, researchers asked teenagers, in the last 24 hours, have you had a meal at home with a parent? In 1992, 2/3 of teenagers said, yes, I have. In 2005, 2/3 of teenagers said, no, I have not. That's a huge change in a short period of time. You've got to fight for meals at home. And I see parents picking up their kids from school and driving to soccer and then to computer coding class, and they're eating on their way from one activity to another. And the unintended message they're sending is that relaxed time at home with family is the lowest priority. That putting on an amazing show to amaze everybody with how amazing you are, that's the highest priority. Don't send that message. That's a toxic message. Watching Carline at my daughter's school, I see kids climb into the car and putting on earbuds and headsets. My wife and I went to the new car dealer, and when he found out we had a daughter, he was very excited, wanted to sell us the rear seat entertainment system, and handed us this flyer. Let's take a look. 2 kids have headsets on, playing a game, looking at a screen. Mom is looking back at her kids, smiling as if to say, hey, this is great. We can drive to New York and never have to talk to my kids at all. What are we thinking? We're all busy. Not enough time. Time in the car is special. It's private time. When you're in the car, you should be listening to your daughter, and she should be listening to you, not to Miley Cyrus or Bruno Mars. No earbuds, no headsets in the car. When you choose a vacation and your daughter asks if she's allowed to bring a friend along, the answer is no. Because if she brings a friend along, it's going to be her and her friend going on the ride through the Haunted Mansion together, and all you've done is to subsidize a very expensive play date. It needs to be you and her in the Haunted Mansion together. That's the point of the vacation, is to strengthen, to prioritize the family. American parents are confused. They think they have to choose between being the tiger mom pushing their kid to achieve or the Irish setter dad who just wants kids to do whatever they want. But that is a false dichotomy. Last chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, is titled The Meaning of Life. What I mean there is that you must give your child your answer to the big question. Why are we here? What's the purpose of human life? And that answer better be better than getting into Stanford or earning lots of money, because those answers will not satisfy. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. If you push a child to achieve without that meaning, without that context, working hard to get a good mark just becomes a race to nowhere, to borrow the title of a documentary making that point, and the result is anxiety, depression, and disengagement. But you can't be the Irish setter dad letting kids do whatever they desire unless you have first educated desire. As researchers find, if you let American teens do whatever they desire, what the average American girl wants is social media, what the average American boy wants is video games. You've got to instill a longing for something better, higher, deeper than that. We began with the question, why are American kids today so much more likely than kids a generation ago to be anxious, depressed, or disengaged? And what can we do about it? Here are my answers. The bonds across generations have been broken, but you must restore them. Parents have allowed social media and video games to displace real-world experience. But you can change that, you can challenge that, you can prioritize the family. American culture now prioritizes fame and wealth over virtue and character, but you must challenge that. You can't change Hollywood, but you can change your family. You'll find more on these points in my books, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, The Collapse of Parenting, Why Gender Matters. Ms. Bowker tells me those books are available for sale, and I'll be happy to sign them if you like. They're also available as audiobooks, shown here if that's the way you like to, if you like to listen to books. Translations are available in 7 languages. If you found this message useful, I hope you'll come up and grab a business card, send me an email. If you know another group that might find this message useful, let me know. Again, the handout is online. It's mynameLeonardSachs.com/harford.pdf. You must include the www and the .pdf. It is case sensitive. It is all lowercase. My email address is shown there. If you go to my website, leonardsachs.com, you can also sign up for my newsletter, which I send out at most once a month, sharing what I've been writing about and what I'm up to. Comments? Question? Raise your hand if you have comment, question, disagreement, story you'd like to share about anything we've talked about this evening. I will repeat your comment for the video. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so this evening I made some very specific recommendations regarding video games and social media. With regard to video games, no more than 40 minutes a night on school nights, no more than an hour a day on weekends. Your minutes do not roll over. With regard to social media, no more than 20 minutes a day. Your colleague asks, what about television? Well, those minutes have nothing to do with television. Okay, well then how much time can kids spend watching television? Well, it depends. It depends on how old the child is. First rule, of course, is no TV until all the chores are done and all the homework is done. Second proviso is what television are we talking about and how old a child? So kids under 5 shouldn't be watching television, period, pretty much are the guidelines of the American Academy. Maybe a few minutes a day of Sesame Street, but really not much else for a child under 5. Those are the AAP guidelines. For older kids, they can have a little more TV, but you need to be very careful about the content. And again, that means no televisions in the bedroom. Because if there's a television in the bedroom, it's very hard for you to monitor the content. In a longer version of this talk, I show you my living room at home. We have one television in our home, in the living room. When we watch television as a family. And parents will say, oh, come on. I don't want my daughter to see the evening news. And I say to that parent, do you want to watch the evening news? Really? No, you don't need to watch the evening news. You can skip it. It's too depressing. And we'll watch musicals together. We'll watch An American Paris, Sound of Music, Singing in the Rain. My daughter knows all the lyrics to all the songs from those musicals, and we sing them in the car. So it depends. YouTube is really dangerous. I can't say enough about how many awful stories I've heard about YouTube, including YouTube Kids. So YouTube promotes that, oh, well, we have a kids channel that's curated, so there's only kid-friendly stuff. Bzz, totally wrong. There are perverse people out there who, for whatever sick reasons of their own, take pleasure in posting wildly inappropriate stuff on the YouTube Kids channel, and it is pathetically easy to fool the artificial intelligence that's supposedly curating the YouTube Kids channel. So on YouTube Kids, you'll find Diego peeing in Dora's face, because some guy created such a video, and the dumb artificial unintelligence sees Diego and Dora and thinks it must be kid-friendly because I recognize Diego and Dora. YouTube is full of toxic stuff. If your kid's going to be on YouTube, you need to be looking over their shoulder. Again, some of these apps have YouTube filters that work a lot better than YouTube's own filters do, but no laptops in the bedroom, no TVs in the bedroom. Other comments? Other questions? Yes, in the way back. Aha. Okay. So what about when your child turns 18? So the story I'd love to share there is Meg Meeker's story. I'm a huge fan of Meg Meeker. I'm sure many of you know her name. Like me, Meg Meeker is a primary care physician. Like me, she has written books for parents and spoken on this topic across the United States. And like me, she knows all this research. And a few years back, we were both on the Today Show together. The segment's nothing special. What was really special for me was the opportunity to have almost 2 hours with Dr. Meeker in the green room, as we were waiting to go on the 4th hour of the Today Show. And she told me about her kids. She has 4 kids, 3 daughters, and her son, Walter, her youngest. And she knows all this research, and she's very firm and very strict. And she said to her son at 12 years of age, she said, you know what? No more video games. We're destroying the device. We're getting rid of it. And you're not going to play any video games at your friends' houses either. No video games. And she told me he was furious. He was like, are you out of your mind? This is what American boys do. That's crazy. She's like, too bad. You're not playing any video games. And this was a cause of tension between them for years. So he's a teenager. He's working these jobs, part-time jobs, and he turns 18. And he says, I am 18 years old. I got my own money. I'm a legal adult. I'm going to go buy an Xbox and Call of Duty. She's like, fine. So he buys an Xbox and a bunch of video games, and he goes off to college a few months later. Toward the end of his first year of college, he called his mom and said, hey, Mom, I just got $400. Guess how I got it? She said, I have no idea. He said, I sold my Xbox and all my video games. He said, Mom, you wouldn't believe there's so many guys here at college who expect you to be really impressed that you can kill, that they can kill. They expect you to be impressed that they can kill 8 aliens in 10 seconds in Halo. I'm like, dude, you can't even talk to girls. The human brain is so plastic at 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age. Look, as a graduate student in psychology, one of my interests was addiction. And it has remained a professional interest of mine over 30 years. And I've counseled many addicts, and I've read the literature. One of the most robust findings in the field of addiction research is that the younger you are when you become addicted, the harder it is to quit. So if you start smoking a pack a day at 24 years of age, you can quit, no problem. You start smoking a pack a day at 13 years of age, the odds that you will ever quit are lower than the odds that a heroin addict will quit heroin on his own. If you start using when your brain is developing at 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age, it imprints on your brain, and it's very difficult to quit. If a boy is spending a lot of time playing video games at 11, 12, 13, 14 years of age, it's very difficult for him to quit. If he starts later, it's easier. That wasn't exactly what your question was, but I wanted to share Meg Meeker's story because it's such a great story. So let's talk about social media. So you posed your question in a very courteous way. Let me pose it the way it is more often posed, which is not so courteous. Parent says, all right, Dr. Sachs, suppose I force my daughter to behave virtuously, whatever that means, and then she goes off to college. There won't be any nanny on college. I cannot plausibly look over her shoulder at college. Isn't she going to rebound? Isn't she just going to go off the deep end if I haven't let her figure out as a teenager in my home? So there's a line in the book of Proverbs in the Bible that reads, if you raise up your child in the way they should go, when they are old, they will not depart from it. Is that true? No, that's a false statement. It is not a true statement. Based on modern research, we can say there are no guarantees. But based on the research we have, we can actually tweak that line in the book of Proverbs in such a way that it becomes a true statement. We can say, if you raise up your child in the way they should go, you have improved the odds. There are no guarantees. But if when your kid is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 years of age, they develop good habits, you've improved the odds that they will retain those good habits when they go to university. If, on the other hand, you have said, well, you know, good parenting means letting kids decide what their own right and wrong is, according to the New York Times. And your son has gotten in the habit of spending 2-3 hours a day playing video games, and your daughter has gotten in the habit of sharing provocative photos on social media. What are the odds that when she goes to university and you're no longer around at all, what's the odds that she's going to say, well, now that I'm at university, I will turn over a new leaf? In my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I share a story. Margot Phillips, true name, a young woman who told me this story and gave me permission to share her name. Growing up as a teenager, her parents were very strict. Margot was and is a very beautiful young woman, and many boys wanted to go out with her. If a boy wanted to date her, he had first to be interviewed by her father, who had veto authority, and if they did go out on a date, one of the parents accompanied them on the date. They were never allowed to be alone, ever. And Margaret was like, are you kidding me? This is child abuse. This is pure and simple child abuse. My friend, she had her boyfriend over for the weekend. Parents were out of town. They slept together. And I'm not even allowed to be alone for 5 seconds with a boy. This is child abuse. I'm going to call Child Protective Services. Mom said, here's the phone. Year after year, she was angry with her parents. She wasn't allowed to go to see any R-rated movie, wasn't allowed to be alone with a boy. She's furious, wasn't allowed to have social media. Then she went to the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. And she told me she had an epiphany at the beginning of her sophomore year. Oh, I forgot the best line. She repeatedly told her parents, she said, I'm going to have to be in therapy for the rest of my life because of the way you are abusing me. Then she went to the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. And she told me she had an epiphany. She realized, oh my goodness, I'm the only girl here who's not going to have to be in therapy for the rest of my life because of the way my parents raised me. So these other girls are coming up to me and saying, do you think this photo makes me look skanky or slutty? And they're posting photos of themselves in lingerie on Instagram, and I'm like, could you get a grip? Don't you have anything better to do than to take photos of yourself in a bikini? This is university. And another girl says, do you think I'm giving too many boys? Do you think it's too slutty? She's like, thank you, Mom. So, being a parent is tough. We're going to adjourn in just a moment, but let me finish with one story. I was an attending physician at Shady Grove Adventist Hospital in Rockville for 18 years. On one occasion, I got a call from the emergency room in the middle of the night. A teenage girl, well known to me, had been a victim of sexual assault. But the ER did not want me to come in as attending or as consulting. They just wanted me to come in and talk to Mom. Mom was hysterical in the consultation room and had asked for me rather than the strangers at the ER. So I came in, drove down to Rockville, and came to the consultation room. It was just her and me as the forensic exam on her daughter was concluding. And as soon as I came in the room, Mom's first words, she said, I knew I shouldn't have let her go. It was a frat party at the college. I knew I shouldn't have let her go. She's 15 years old. And of course you want to grab Mom and shake her and say, well, then why'd you let her go? But I didn't say that because I knew the answer. She wants to be her daughter's best friend. And a friend cannot prohibit, a friend cannot refuse. And her daughter had assured her that they'd all be safe. Better example of good parenting comes from a mom I was talking to in Tampa, Florida. Her 14-year-old daughter came to her and announced, hey, we're all going to Cancun for spring break. And Mom looked at her phone, she's like, well, I can't get away that week, I'm busy. And her daughter said, I didn't say you're going to Cancun for spring break. I said, I'm going to Cancun for spring break, me and my friends. Now, this is an affluent family. Mom couldn't reasonably say that she couldn't afford it. That wouldn't be plausible in that family. Mom said, Cancun, that's in Mexico. That's where all the college guys go for spring break. And you're 14, but you could easily pass for 18, and a young man's not going to ask for ID. I don't think it's safe. And her daughter said, it's fine, it's totally safe, we'll be fine, we'll stay together, it's fine. And Mom said, I'm sorry, you're not going. And she told me her daughter exploded, started screaming at her. You're going to like totally ruin my whole life. I hate you, I hate you. And Mom said, well, to be totally honest, sometimes I'm not so fond of you either. She said, but I'm your mother, and that is a job. And like any job, it has a job description. And my job is to keep you safe. And I know more than you do about the behavior of drunk college men, and you're not going. If you're doing the right thing as a parent, there will be times that your daughter or son is angry at you and upset with you and may even say, I hate you. It's part of your job. You have to have the courage to do the right thing. So it's past 8 o'clock. On that cheerful note, let's adjourn. I'll go out front and sign books if anyone wants a book. And again, the handout is on, thank you very much. The handout is online, leonardsachs.com/harford.pdf.